Hello, world civilization students. This is our last video module on China, and then I will sort of double up. We were going to have on Wednesday, if I remember correctly, the last part of China, and then Friday, today, we were just going to do the review. We're going to do both today. Hopefully it keeps it a little more fresh in your mind for Monday when I send out the test. Okay, so we'll finish up China in this module, and then I'll shortly thereafter upload a module entitled Unit 2 Review. So those of you who were there for the first test, at least to be aware, whatever is in this review module, oh man, is very, very similar to what you'll see on the test on Monday. And again, on Monday, I will send out like that mass email through the district program to both you and parents, etc., so that you guys can see the attached test, and then you'll have to turn in by the end of the day to me via email your completed test. It will recommend that you spend the recommended time on it and not anything more, and no other aids or helps or internet or digital help. So that's what's coming up on Monday. But let's finish up China first. So we have done sort of part 1 and part 2, so you have those two for China. The third digital page, and really the third part that we're going to cover, is the last one on current events, environment, odds and ends. Okay. Again, the theme for China being tons of potential, but hasn't yet been totally polished, is an example of that. Many developed economies in Western Europe, for instance, have been around the block. They sort of know, okay, we want to have growth, but not at the expense of like public health, and there's this balancing act. France has had to balance with nuclear energy, trying to keep their own air and streets clean, but also knowing that the protocols for the plants are important. You have to have that balancing. China's getting there, and to their credit, in the world over, their economy is growing so fast that they are trying to, but there are troubles with it, right? Because it's just new. If I ever have you for U.S. history, we covered that in the progressive era and the Industrial Revolution. The U.S. had its, the good, the bad, the ugly, and they had its fair share of the ugly. So there's that overall theme. The environment is sort of that way. There's 5 things we're going to put down here in the environment. The first one is 16 of the world's most, I'll say it this way, 16 of the world's top 20 most polluted cities, 16 of the world's top 20 most polluted cities are found in China. So 16 of the top 20 are found in China. So the world over, you look at the top 20, 16 of them are in China. Now, for a couple points, non-existent points, why? What's the big problem there? Oh, Jada, I think you got it. That one, they make so much stuff, right? They're the manufacturing hub of the world. We in the U.S., maybe from environmental standards, companies are like, I don't want to go through that regulation because by making that much plastic and goods and so forth, it would be so much regulation. We're just not going to do it. China can do it. Okay, so, and they take advantage of that. A lot of South Asia does as well. Southeast Asia too. Environmentally, they're not as particular on things, so that happens there. Yes, a lot of our products come from China. Any other thoughts? Ellie, yes. The idea is they use coal. The U.S. uses coal, right? West Virginia, big coal area, Kentucky too. But we've tried to phase more and more of it out because of its lung-penetrating particulates, like that get in the air, and that's where, not to say you get the black lung, but lung conditions, upper respiratory conditions can happen because of just burning coal, right? You burn coal, gets the steam, moves pistons and wheels, and you have the Industrial Revolution. But by burning coal, you have some troubles with it, mainly because of emissions, not just because it's a non-renewable source, you got to excavate it, but just the pollution and smog. There's a difference between that and even like natural gas burning power plants. Coal, and oftentimes dirty coal, there's clean coal, right, that goes through like smokestack scrubbers that like scrub the emissions off and so forth, that make it a little bit better. Utah's got some of those plants. But in China, a lot of them are just using dirty coal, like they're burning it and then just particulates are in the air, and that can be problematic. So yeah, that's the first thing. 16 of the world's top 20 most polluted cities reside in China. For some more points, anybody knows the other 4? I mean, these lists change drastically because it depends on what you look at. But a couple other big culprits in the world are, let's see, that is correct, Leo. That one of them is going to be Mexico City. Another one, let's see, yes, Kayla is going to be probably Rio in Brazil. Let's see, Blake, you're not wrong. I'm talking to non-existent people here. Los Angeles has actually had times because of the urban sprawl. Those of you who've been there, it's a weird valley and it just encapsulates all the smog, like Cache Valley. But you have like this crazy urban sprawl. All the traffic, public transportation is really non-existent in LA too, which is odd, one of the biggest cities in the country, and there's no real reliable public transportation. So there's that. And ding, 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 Caleb, yes, New Delhi in India. Sometimes Bangladesh is that, but New Delhi, India is definitely in the top 20. And they're growing too. So a lot of pollution and smog, mainly because of high urban areas, but they're taking advantage of like making products, but maybe environmentally aren't as aware of those things. China, economically, that has a correlation there that more economic growth can also lead to more greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. Yeah. Okay, the second thing you're going to write down here is some of its most populated cities have pollution levels 40 times the scale limit set by the World Health Organization. So some of its most populated cities have pollution levels 40 times the safe limit set by the World Health Organization. So WHO, or WHO, a lot of you have seen news releases and press conferences from WHO. President Trump has had a tenuous relationship with them because they are trying to manage. I mean, they're like the UN arm, if you want to look at it that way, in terms of health. In this case, the COVID-19 pandemic, this has been, well, they tried to manage it worldwide from WHO in the same way they look at worldwide health factors for pollution and smog. And this isn't like a US-based company. This is an international-based company. And even they, by their own definitions, look at these cities in China, some of the most polluted ones. It's 40, not 14, not 40 times the safe limit set by WHO. Now you might think, well, who cares? You know, Mother Earth can recover and we can make good products and have a good standard of living, and there's arguments to be made for that. But let's be real, like as you are doing that, when it's that bad, you might think the real effects. And this is the third thing you'll write down here to show both sides of the political spectrum in the U.S. can agree, like, okay, there is a limit, like, you have to be aware of pollution. Even Utah, which is highly conservative in the Cache Valley region in terms of its inversion, it's a real problem. Like, you have to acknowledge it, regardless of if you're a proponent of global climate change advocacy or not. You know, you have to admit that. Okay, so the third thing is the level in China for lung penetrating particles is so high, it isn't even on the EPA scale. Now, the EPA is a US-based company, Environmental Protection Agency. So the level in China for lung penetrating particles is so high, it isn't even on the EPA scale, causing 1.2 million premature deaths annually. 1.2 million premature deaths annually. A 465% increase in lung cancer rates. So 1.2 million premature deaths, 465% increase in lung cancer rates, and a shortened life expectancy of 5 years. So 1.2 million premature deaths, 465% increase in lung cancer rates, and shortened life expectancy of 5 years. Now, this is in China, right? EPA looking at our scale, comparing it to what you see in China. Who cares if it's off or on the scale? Doesn't matter. Just keep living a good life. But if you can't even live the life, then the whole standard of living argument goes out the window. And that's where 1.2 million premature deaths. Now, you all are much more sensitive to this now because we looked at like the number of cases worldwide for COVID versus the life expectancy of it and the death rates, etc. The U.S. is an interesting tale. As we get to tens of thousands of deaths attributed to COVID, there are other confounding factors, right? Upper respiratory infections, pneumonia, suppressed immune system, autoimmune deficiencies, age, and those of you who've had older loved ones pass on. A lot of times it's hard to attribute anything of what they actually died from, but organ failure, cardiac arrest, it's a bad foot injury that never healed, septic blood. I mean, there's so many different things in terms of age when you get to that point that you can attribute it to a lot. Some of the attribution for death in China can be for the cities for poor air quality, right? So that 1.2 million premature deaths, that could be a number that's massaged in a way that makes it seem bigger than what it actually is. Same thing with COVID-19. The idea of we've had record lows for pneumonia and influenza deaths in major cities, so maybe it's more of a factor of people attributing it to COVID-19. It's hard because there's confounding factors, but at least it's got its hand in the pot of why people could be dying. Lung cancer rates skyrocketed, and also the life expectancy by about 5 years. Now, how do they compare that? Those who live in the rural parts out west, there could be confounding variables of better life, et cetera, out there. But correlation, I suppose, at least, is that life expectancy is usually longer out there than it is in the cities. Even with like a better standard of living, you'll have those problems. Okay, so that's real. That's very bad. In fact, you'll see like meme photos of people going to Hong Kong, etc., trying to take like touristy pictures, but it's such a smog-filled area that they'll have like a backdrop that's like a fake digital one to be like, I was in Hong Kong, and you can't even take a real picture. Okay, the fourth thing to write down is they tried to clean up Grazing, right? Grazing for the 2008 Summer Olympics. They tried to clean up Grazing for the 2008 Summer Olympics. Now we say Grazing because it's a funny little moniker for Beijing, right? The political capital definitely has its fair share of pollution, waterways, and smog. Just like New York City does, just like Chicago does. Any of the cities have struggles with it. Some cities get better than others. Paris is better than what we might see in New York. New York's maybe in a way better than LA at certain times of the year. So it's hard, but Grazing, they did to their credit. They shut off a lot of factories leading to the 2008 Olympics. They had shortened like passes for driving, a little bit more tight in terms of like smog and pollution from cars. Yeah. Okay. Let's do this. Let's have, for the fifth and final thing in environment, is they have also elevated the State Environmental Protection Administration. They have also elevated the State Environmental Protection Administration, or SEPA, S-E-P-A, right? So their own version of the EPA, to a ministry-level position. To a ministry-level position. Now, some of you might say, well, big whoop, what does that mean? It might be token and saying, hey, we elevated them and now we're doing better. But the reality is it's something. They've elevated it to say we care more about the environment. It's a ministry level position, similar, if you will, to after 9/11. Department of Homeland Security was a new department created with the new member of the cabinet, etc. And so, while some might say, who cares? Like, you're not doing anything about Homeland Security. Well, at least we created a position for it and we've elevated it. Same thing for China. And those who live there in Shanghai, I've heard, are hopeful that they will continue to improve regulation and enforcement of burning dirty coal, especially for factories. Okay, in the last section here under odds and ends, we will have a total of 4 things. So you have space on the bottom, you got space on the back if you need to. The first thing is, recently China has struggled with the idea of term limits. T-E-R-M, term limits. Recently China has struggled with the idea of term limits. Okay. What does that mean? In the U.S., we're used to having like a presidential term limit, but we don't have it. It's always careful when we're talking about other countries. It's easy to get on a high horse of like, and that's why they're so bad. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay, there's some judgment calls we can make here. But I'm also not saying like cultural relativism, like nothing matters, everybody's just different. That's not what I'm saying either. But the U.S. Senate and the House, we have no term limits for those major elected positions. So it's hard, but we do for the president, right? For high-ranking officials within the Chinese government, several years ago, they said, okay, like when Hu Jintao finished and Xi Jinping stepped in, it was the idea of having term limits. So there was this idea of having like a 10-year term limit and then you're done. That was the idea. And they really thought like with Hu Jintao stepping down or at least finishing and Xi Jinping, like that'd be the game plan. Unfortunately, that was not the case. That's what I mean by having a strained or a tense relationship with term limits is recently, the last year and a half, Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party has announced that like they're not going to honor the term limits, that 10-year thing for Xi Jinping for 5 points. Anybody know why? Ding, 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 ding. Yes. The reason why Berkeley would be if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like economically. Think of the FDR time before we had term limits really for the president. FDR during the wartime, we felt really comfortable and confident, so we just kept electing him to 4 terms. On the topic of China, if it's going well and economically they're doing well, just keep him in office, right? So that was the strained relationship. That was a recent change. Okay, the second thing you're going to write down is some of the citizens' discontent stems from the Chinese household registration system. Some of the Chinese citizens' discontent stems from the Chinese household registration system. Okay. This is also still in the same spot. You want to write, this is also called hukou. I could be butchering the pronunciation, but you can spell it Hukou. In hukou, it's this idea of, we have this idea where like you can't come into the country without having proper citizenship or at least some type of papers. Okay, most countries have that. In China, population things are so tight within the main cities in the East Coast. If you're moving into the cities, you have to go through the household registration system to see how many people you have in your home, where are they moving to, and if they don't get permission from the government, they can't move there. So there is this discontent, even in the cities, for transportation. In 2011, they reduced the actual renewed licenses by 1/3. By 2/3. Actually, in 2011, they only kept 1/3 of all of the current licenses there. So that means like if you were up to renew your license and it just says, nope, we're not going to renew it. It's one, maybe an attempt to battle pollution, but also two, like, you ain't got to go home, but you best be getting out of here. There could be a mentality of like, you got to get going because we're not going to support that. And let's see. Okay. The third thing you write down is, while the country has improved on the rule of law, they still struggle to hold leaders accountable. Okay, the rule of law. While the country has improved on a rule of law, they still struggle to hold leaders accountable. Now, rule of law, these are things we take for granted. Rule of law is basically the idea, and if you wanted to, you can write it in the margin, but rule of law is the idea that the law is written down, it was passed somehow, even if it was illegitimate, and we're consistent to the law. Even if it's like a dictator, like, this is the law. The rule of law means that it's written down somewhere and it's enforced consistently. A non-rule of law would be like a dictator making it up on the spot, like, and off with your head, and we don't like you, and you're wearing purple, and get out of here. That's not the rule of law. China, to their credit, even though the CCP is in control, has tried to codify, like write down laws and keep them in place. Some of the tricky parts is, if you're trying to get rid of leaders because of other reasons, and you cite corruption generally, there is a little bit of tricky parts there. Investigative journalism has been better, but it still struggles a little bit with holding leaders accountable. Okay, last thing we're going to write down here is while term limits might be gone, they do have a retirement age. So they do have a retirement age. That's something to be said. So again, I'm trying to show you China has advanced, sometimes awkwardly, but also they're making some other attempts to make it not be awkward. We're going to have retirement age. And the reason why term limits, or at least putting a limit on people, is good is the influx of new ideas, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Your dear great aunt could be the best person in the world. You give her all the power without any time limit, and historically, that's going to make the person go bad. And so that's something to keep in mind there. All right, so that's the one for our last section in China. Thank you so much. I'm going to upload here a review module for the test on China and Russia here shortly, and thanks.